Whether in Nairobi or in Monrovia, Liberia, or in Stockholm or in Vancouver or in San Francisco or New York, I think so often, especially kind of on the innovation side of the food system, people are often designing really exciting products or solutions before like deeply figuring out a problem that they're trying to address. Yeah, to be honest with you, I would be super happy if tailored food didn't exist in 5 years. We tried to share our learnings and our lessons as far and wide as possible. We are a small little organization, doing everything we can, but our goal is to influence the actions and activities and funding decisions of the world's biggest organizations, whether those the biggest corporations out there like Unilever, who we work with, or the biggest UN agencies, or the biggest funding organizations like the Gates Foundation or others. So if we achieve our goal, all the stakeholders in the food system would be thinking really thoughtfully in designing nutritious, low-cost food products. And then whether we exist or not is kind of less important.
Taylor Quinn had a pretty normal life in Canada until this one took a sharp turn when he decided to move to Liberia in order to help the people in need there. When he was in Liberia, he witnessed the devastating impact of malnutrition, and he realized of one thing: malnutrition is not a matter of the amount of food available, but the quality of that food. This experience is what led him to found Taylor Foods. With Taylor Foods, Taylor is working with local entrepreneurs, global organizations, and food companies with the idea of developing low cost, nutritious, and culturally relevant foods that can help to tackle the hunger. The mission is clear. Once hunger is solved, Taylor Foods will not make sense anymore. And that is what Taylor Quinn wants. You can discover much more about his journey, his challenges, the strategies that he used by listening to this conversation that we had in Tomorrow's Bites.
Taylor, thanks for coming. We've been in contact, and after that you came to us, I was very surprised positively about the work that you're doing over the years, and also the short call that we had. And I can do a good introduction about our guest, but I think it's always fair that the guest does it by himself. So how would you describe yourself, Taylor?
Sure. I would say I grew up in a pretty typical middle-class Canadian upbringing, and through kind of a weird series of circumstances, became incredibly obsessed with nutritious, low-cost food, living in Liberia back in 2015, 2016. And then I've been, ever since then, person, sometimes an entrepreneur, sometimes a entrepreneur, but a person dedicated to trying to figure out how to make sure that everyone everywhere has access to good quality food.
How does the journey start actually? How is the first moment you become, for example, interested in nutrition?
Yeah, so for me, I studied food anthropology in university. So I'd always really, and from the age of 12 years old, I was working in grocery stores in near my house in my hometown in Western Canada. So I'd always kind of worked in food. Food was always something that I was a little curious by. I studied this type of stuff in university. Why do people eat what they eat? But it wasn't until I was living in Liberia, working on an unrelated project where really, it sounds maybe cliche to say, but there really was this one meeting I had with Dr. Jude Sengkungu, who is a pediatrician at the hospital that was hardest hit by Ebola. This was during the time when Ebola was still going on in West Africa, when Ebola was really bad. And I met with Dr. Jude on March 23rd, 2016. And I met him in his hospital. There was children dying of malnutrition in the hallway. And he took time out of his day to meet with me. And he explained to me, he's like, look, Taylor, I feed kids with all these different donated food products that different UN agencies donate to my hospital. I treat their malnutrition, and I send these kids home, and there's no advice I can give to their mothers because nutritious, low-cost food simply is not available in local markets. And so he went on to explain to me, he said, look, moms will bring their kids in 3, 4, maybe 5 times when these kids are on the brink of starvation. And treats them and sends them back home. And the cycle just starts again, right? And so moms are just like seeing their kids in this torturous cycle where charities were addressing the symptom and we're like, trying to treat malnutrition, and there weren't really people working on the prevention side of things of, hey, how do you actually make culturally relevant, delicious food accessible to everybody? And at that time, luckily, I was living in a neighborhood of Liberians who lived their lives in extreme poverty. And I saw every day that the people I was friends with, my neighbors, they were working jobs and they were, buying food for their children, and their children were still malnourished. It wasn't that these people had no money. It's like people who are hardworking people who are just trying to keep their kids happy and healthy. And the food system just kind of was broken, in this context. And so I became obsessed with the question of, and luckily I was 22 and very naive. And so I became obsessed with the question of, it shouldn't be that complicated to design super tasty, healthy food that could be affordable to the poorest of the poor.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful that you are so opportunistic and see that problem and wants to dive into it. I mean, it's great work that you're doing, but you have to start in a lot of places then from zero, I suppose. So how was that for yourself? That first day that you were like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to set it up. Like, how did you start?
Yeah. I didn't think I was going to necessarily set it up or do it or necessarily be able to figure it out. It was more so just that day or the next day. It was just this intellectual fascination I had. And I was like, I just want to talk to people. I want to learn more about this. I want to immerse myself in this problem. And, it's easy in hindsight to say, oh yeah, we were trying to build a business or we were trying to, scale it to all these different countries. But it really was this kind of accidental journey, one day at a time of, okay, well, like, yeah, maybe we could do a little bit about this, here or there. Oh, maybe there's this opportunity. And then, it snowballs, pretty quickly to, the place it is today where we work in, 31 countries and with all the largest food system institutions out there and all of that. But, all it was initially was I was kind of pissed off that my neighbors couldn't afford good quality food, to be honest.
Then I wonder, because it's not only like the moment that you decide to start, but also like the first steps that you take, the ones who define a little bit the path. How did you confront like the beginning of your work?
Yeah. For me, I started by, the anthropologist in me. I started by trying to deeply understand the cultural dynamics in the food system. So how did people think about health? What foods were they buying today? How were those foods serving their families, serving their kind of traditions around food? And then really diving into the private sector in Liberia too. And to be clear, I spent 2 years completely, utterly failing. I was working with the wrong private sector stakeholders. I was, incredibly stalled, refusing to pay bribes to the Liberian government and the Lebanese mafia who controlled a lot of the food ecosystem in Liberia. So I was stalled. I was not able to make progress. I was working with the wrong people. So it was, to clarify, it was not kind of smooth sailing. It was 2 years of a lot of challenge and working with the wrong people. But over time and trying different products too. So I would, work with the chefs I was working with. We would develop a product concept. I'd take it into the streets and into schools in Liberia, get people to eat it, collect all the feedback, go back to the drawing board, be like, oh, this is a bad idea. That's a bad idea. So it was like a very slow grind. It was not some like quick and smooth success.
To do this research, for example, to start like seeing what people buy, how people feed their children, did you have to go to the houses to be in the households, or it was that they would report to you whatever they do?
Yeah, so I would go to households, and one thing in my introduction I didn't mention is that I really enjoy running. And so I've always combined my running and my research together. So even before this, I was already spending any time I had, any free time I had, just running through, generally speaking, low income Liberian communities. And when you do that, you're inherently going to meet friendly people who want to talk to you. And so, yeah, I was spending time in households, in markets, also not only meeting with households, but meeting with market vendors, people who run shops, understanding what products are people excited to buy, what are consumers looking for, all that kind of fundamental research to try to understand what is this food system landscape, and what are the factors that are important.
Yeah, so you basically, it's very good the way how you approach this thing, because you try to understand it from, let's say, the core, the start of where a business or any organization or how you should work out, and then find solutions to it. Like you do quite unique work, and out of these things, what are like unique lessons that you can take out that are might be relevant for, like the Western view on how food systems should be built?
I think, at the core, and this was always true, including today. I was in an urban slum community in Nairobi, Kenya today, meeting with moms and their little kids, and talking to them about what things they're buying and why they're buying their things they're buying. Whether in Nairobi or in Monrovia, Liberia, or in Stockholm or in Vancouver or in San Francisco or New York, I think so often, especially kind of on the innovation side of the food system, people are often designing really exciting products or solutions before like deeply, deeply, deeply figuring out a problem that they're trying to address. And there's when it comes to food, there's some sort of belief that, people aren't buying this cool new product just because they're not educated about it. But it's like, no, people are making really thoughtful decisions, whether they're low income, high income. People are making really thoughtful, conscientious decisions. So like, how do we understand those decisions someone's making? Like, someone's not buying an energy drink or a piece of candy just because they don't care about their body. They're buying it because it brings them joy, or it might make them feel connected to their father, or like there's all these reasons behind we buy what we buy, right? Or they might eat meat and not tofu because of like something from their childhood. So understanding those core reasons, and then we can design a solution that, still makes them feel that connection to childhood or makes them feel joy. But first understanding deeply the problem we're trying to solve has been kind of the core through line of my work, and why people buy what they buy.
Yeah, so that are even lessons for the Western part, let's say, of innovations in food. Like on to dive into that a bit more, it's like let's say the challenges, the reasons why people buy things or why certain systems are not in place. What is then the next step that you're going to take?
Yeah. So first step for us is, always, trying to deeply understand the market landscape and why people are buying what they're buying. And then the second step is really to start trying to match that problem with the market opportunities that are out there. What are the crops that are grown? Where there may be food waste streams we can utilize that are really nutritious and that we can get at a low cost. What are the hacks we can utilize to keep production costs down? And at the end of the day, like, what are the food products that we could design, with all these different input, that people are excited to eat.
What is exactly then the service that tailored food provides, and to who? Like, to who is the customer?
Good question. So we have a couple different customers. What we do at our core is always relatively the same. Who we do it for is a little bit different, depending on the project. So what we do at our core is we research food system dynamics. We then identify partners, whether those are entrepreneurs, big UN agencies, big corporate food companies. And then we work with those partners to develop and then, and most importantly, scale the production and sale of nutritious low cost food. So who we do that for, we started this work at our core. I, wasn't interested in, or I didn't even think that we would ever work with bigger stakeholders, but we started this work, and kind of the core of our work is we do this work for and with grassroots entrepreneurs around the world. So we have long-term small and medium-sized businesses that we partner with, we develop food products with, and then we help them grow their businesses for years or decades to come is the model. But as we were doing that, and as we started talking about it, other people started asking us if we could help them do the same thing. But the initial ask came from the UN World Food Program. And honestly, when the UN World Food Program asked me to come to Congo and help them figure something out in the Congolese food system, I was like, no. Like, we're just building a little business in Liberia. Like, we're not interested in expanding. Like, I knew the Liberian market, but I didn't think, this could necessarily, I didn't know if there was any, kind of scalability or applicability. But what we learned building this incredibly fun and cool business model in Congo, where 160 women entrepreneurs produce an indigenous protein bar that packaged in banana leaf rather than plastic. And these 160 entrepreneurs sell this protein bar to the UN as well as into retail markets, and have successfully for the last couple of years now. What we learned in that project and others, has been that there are some cool learnings to this work. So sorry, but to answer your question more directly, we map, develop, and scale up food products, and we do that work directly with entrepreneurs in kind of long-term partnerships, and then through consulting projects with everyone from Unilever to UNICEF to tiny Kenyan startup companies, and kind of all sorts of stakeholders in between.
It's interesting that you have a diverse group of, let's say, clients in that sense, from commercial ones to non-profit organizations, because you then also have to work with different interests. How do you balance it out? Because in the goal, what you want is providing nutritious food, but, like implementing basically the same system as what we have in the Western world in those places is not always the right solution. We have seen that as well.
Completely. Yeah. That's just quickly to touch back on the Congo example. We find in some markets, it makes more sense to scale out rather than scale up. So, in the West, we believe, food production has to be done in a big factory. We find there's certain markets where that's actually not true. It's much better to build 16 micro factories across Congo than it makes sense to build one giant factory. So to that point, yeah, there are a lot of specific nuances. For us, working with a diverse set of clients, the fun thing about what we do is that food is so core to every human's existence. And the reality is that 99.9% of people around the world are spending cash on food every day. Yes, there's some, refugees, people in Gaza right now, for example, who their entire systems have been destroyed, and therefore they're the recipients of charity. But most, even low income people, they're spending real cash on food. And so whether we're working for the World Bank or the World Food Program or Unilever or a cool Mozambican startup, kind of the core is the same. People need to buy nutritious food, or a school lunch program needs to buy nutritious low cost food. And so a lot of the kind of core work is the same, even if the clients are different.
How do you define nutritious food?
That's a complicated question, an important question, but a complicated one. So we take the approach of going as far as we can with whole food ingredients. So we will leverage what foods are available locally, what crops are available locally, what spices and food flavors are available locally. And then in some situations, when what's available locally doesn't necessarily meet the micro and macro nutrient profile that we want to hit, we'll supplement with like a vitamin and mineral blend that'll be customized for the products. So we'll maybe add some kind of vitamin fortification into products, but we generally view nutritious food to be, whole food products made with, everything that you could read on the label is understandable. And ideally, everything we do is at least 80% locally sourced ingredients, usually above 95% locally sourced ingredients. Occasionally we'll use an imported ingredient, again, just for that added nutritional value.
I think that then you are putting here something interesting, that is, because the way that you're describing how you design your foods does not go with the way that in the Western societies we understand as low cost. If you would look for anything that is locally sourced or that is more organic, normally would cost more than something that comes from outside. And so how do you, what is the strategy you follow then to keep something nutritious at the same time as low cost?
Yeah, it's an important question. So I'd say just one thing that is really fun in most of the countries we work in is that we don't have the same weird subsidy system that you have in North America or Europe, especially North America. Europe, you're a little bit better. But in North America, especially, we subsidize industrialized animal agriculture and we subsidize corn. So therefore, like all the junk food is more expensive, right? The cool thing in the markets we're operating in, like there aren't those same subsidies. So, for example, like more processed food is inherently more expensive because there's like more stuff, it's not artificially cheap. Or like the cost of like a hot dog is more than the cost of, a banana because inherently like the hot dog is more processed and there's not subsidies around it or whatever it might be, right? So that's one aspect that, we're operating kind of easier markets in that sense. But, in short, our work on affordability, there's honestly like no kind of great secret. Just at every aspect of the value chain, we are looking for innovations and cost reduction opportunities. For example, in some of the countries we operate in, the cost of an hour of human generated electricity is still cheaper than the cost of an hour of electricity from the electrical grid. So it makes more economic sense for us to have hand cranked machines versus a machine you plug into the wall. Or like in Congo, it's much cheaper for us to use banana leaves as our packaging than to use imported plastic packaging. Of course, also more sustainable, but like just purely from an economics perspective, it makes more sense. So there's kind of pieces along the chain. But just to touch, because like, yes, what we do is, we focus on healthy food. But to be honest, from like a consumer perspective, we do not focus on healthy food. We focus on food that first and foremost tastes really awesome, has a cool, sexy marketing campaign around it, and is convenient and kind of like meets people where they're at. The fourth metric we focus on from a like consumer facing perspective is health and nutrition. But we find those other three things have to be true. Taste, kind of marketing and brand appeal, and then convenience and affordability.
Yesterday we released an episode of the podcast with an author called Caroline Steele, and she mentioned in that episode the concept of the true cost of food. That is really related to what you were mentioning about the subsidies in the end. That in the end we are maybe externalizing certain costs that in the end have a higher impact in terms of maybe sustainability or water depletion, and in the end that if we would take out all the subsidies, for example, like I think she made an exaggeration, but it's like a burger or a steak that we normally could buy for less than 10 euros, it could cost more than 200 if we had to have like the real cost of the things. And I think that is quite related to what you were mentioning, that since there is this subsidy system set up in many of the countries that you're working on, it makes you see what is the true value of the things, because it's like more processes means more expensive. And
at the other way at the same time in here, ultra processed tends to be cheaper for some reason. I think it's just it blows my mind to think like how did we create this problem to ourselves?
Right. And so like one fun dynamic that I see, including today, I was in a shop today and talking to this shopkeeper about all these vegan meats he was selling, all these plant-based meat. So in Europe or North America, plant-based meat, whether made with soya or vital wheat gluten or whatever it is, are much more expensive than a burger or a hot dog or a chicken breast. But the crazy thing is, across Eastern and Southern Africa, people have been eating plant-based meats for generations at this point. And there's all these companies that have been in the plant-based meat space forever, doing like all sorts of interesting plant-based meat products in Africa. But plant-based meat products in Africa, they're just like, oh yeah, like they're the, good quality protein, but they're like much more affordable. And so they're generally like seen as kind of lower status. Like only when you have money, then you buy the more expensive beef or chicken or lamb or whatever it might be. So that's one interesting example where, the reality is like, you should like in rural Zambia, you'll find, soy curl. And if anyone who's listening, knows the plant-based alternative protein world, soy curls are generally they're like dehydrated soy chunks. That's like a pretty hard product to find in Europe. But if you're in rural Zambia, you will find soy curls everywhere.
Well, that is a particular, like when we talk about plant-based, alternatives, what kind of other examples do you have then in that case?
Yeah. So the cool thing, for me in the markets I work in is generally outside of like the kind of European stuff, European countries or like countries that have like heavily colonial based diets, people were eating, primarily plant-based foods for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Meat has generally always been kind of a more luxury item. So you might consume meat during a celebration or during a special occasion, or, way back in hunter-gatherer days, when like, oh, you happen to catch the big animal, but your day-to-day diet was nut, feed, different types of legumes, fruits and veg you were harvesting locally, and maybe some smaller animals, right? And depending on the society, of course. And so I could talk all day about, the really cool, various forms of kind of plant-based meats, if you want to call them that, that exist all over the place. Of course, there's some more obvious examples like tempeh in Indonesia or tofu in East Asia. But there's as mentioned, dehydrated, like texturized soy, that's come out of southeastern Africa for decades now. Soy crumbles are a big thing here in East Africa. So in this shop in an urban slum today, one of the shopkeeper's most profitable, kind of highly popular items is a brand called Saucy, which is a soy crumble that's flavored just like meat, but it cooks faster. It's about 3 times cheaper than meat, and so it's a very, very popular product here in Kenya. You have plant-based ground beef style products in Brazil that have been popular for a long time. So there's all sorts of interesting innovations, but it kind of requires a bit of a flip, right? From a lot of the kind of, again, what we were talking about earlier of maybe entrepreneurs developing an exciting solution and then going and looking at a problem. But if you kind of look historically and look at cultures around the world, there's all sorts of great product concepts that definitely could use improvements, could use new innovations, but there's a lot of really cool stuff out there that you can build on. You don't necessarily always need to be creating something brand new.
Yeah, well, I think that is for me this is actually new information. It's not the view what I have established over the years, also because I never got that information basically. I like to know because you're now doing this for 6 years almost, right? Your own projects eventually. And it's building up from like infrastructures that didn't exist, some of them, right? So what are then the best strategies for you that you have learned over the years to build up actually all these infrastructures from the start? Because you mentioned already it's doing the market research, right? Like what is potentially a market that we can enter? What are products around us, what we can use locally? But in the end, you need to build that infrastructure, and that requires way more than only that market research part.
Of course. Yeah, it does. So the model we have adopted at Tailored Food is very maybe like different than how other people approach it. And I don't think one is better or worse, but our model is that we try to work really lightly for a long time, but really lightly in many, many places. And so the way we do that is we believe that we should partner with local entrepreneurs and local knowledge experts. And those people know how to build infrastructure and build systems in their communities and their countries that work really well and are customized to those locations. And so, yeah, so you'll never find the name Tailored Food branded on a product anywhere. We work with local partners and under their brands, and we try to be the behind the scenes partner, providing them all the support they need to develop new products, scale up, sell to the UN agencies, all of that type of work. So that's been allowed us to scale pretty quickly, because we found the problem is not that there's not, incredibly passionate, committed food entrepreneurs on the ground, whether at the community or regional or national levels in the countries we operate. Those people are there. They're hustling every day. We find, let's work with those people and provide them the support they need to be successful.
I was curious at the beginning, you mentioned that there were like several mistakes made because, of course, I mean, being an entrepreneur and not making mistakes is as impossible as seeing unicorns. No, it's not really something we can prevent. It's really shots in the dark completely. What was the mistake that you got the most important lesson for growing later?
I think for us in the work we do, and it's obvious to say that like really trying, like it's all about like working with the right or the not wrong people, but like not the most aligned people. And if you're just aligning around a business interest, that's one thing. But like we found that those partnerships haven't been the ones that lasted. Can we identify people who are really like genuinely committed, even when you have a bad month business wise, like people who are willing to like be patient and figure it out. So that would be the biggest mistake we made, of trying to work with the individuals who might have been the best on paper, kind of been the flashiest businesses, but not necessarily those entrepreneurs who are really in it for the long term.
How do you do now in order to detect those people, that the good people now?
Yeah, I don't like. I wish I could articulate it or even know myself. Like we still make mistakes, right? But generally now, we find, we have, kind of built up some knowledge over the years of like how to identify good people, with also ensuring that we're, really doing a good vetting of the kind of nuts and bolts of the business, all the basics is, is there, good margins, is there, redundancies built into the supply chain in case one supplier disappears one day? All those business fundamentals are there, but then we try to spend, a good amount of time with our partners to really try to ensure we're working with the right people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you will keep on having this, right? I mean, I think that whenever you expand also to new areas, that you have to start again, not that known yet, or you need new business business partners in that sense.
Mhm.
Going back, one of your goals basically achieving zero hunger by 2023, 2030. I find it ambitious, and I think it's also complex. But based on your experience so far over the years, what are like the most, let's say, biggest barriers that needs to be addressed
Mhm.
to achieve this?
Yeah. So it's a bold goal. It is we're aligning with it's the Sustainable Development Goal number 2. So it's the part of the UN kind of goals for 2030. It's already 2024. We're about to turn the calendar to 2025 as we record this. We still very much see that it's completely feasible. Again, given the fact that food is not a social problem where you have to subsidize things or you have to build, health and education infrastructure. Again, 99.9% of people around the world are buying food every day. This is like a completely like market driven system. And therefore, like, you don't need to create a whole bunch of subsidies. You don't need to find, trillions of dollars of commitments at the global level. But it would require a shift of companies being willing to sell food that's still profitable, but that's actually healthy and nutritious. And so, what gives us hope is we see companies slowly but surely shifting the types of products in their portfolio, the big companies who dominate the global food landscape. The biggest barrier we see is really one of framing. Most development organizations and even, big companies that generally are pretty tapped into what consumers think, but big development organizations who fund a lot of work in the food space believe the problem is knowledge. The problem is that, low income people, they're just uneducated. If only we educate them with all of our wisdom around nutrition, people will make smart decisions. The reality is people have the education. They're making really thoughtful decisions today, but they care about taste. They care about a brand. They care about taste and affordability. And then they also care about health, right? So the biggest barrier we see is if all the money spent today on educating people could actually just be spent on designing food products that meet those people where they're at today, then we could achieve zero hunger by 2030, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. Because like, it's a very ambitious goal. I hope that you achieve that in that sense. But we also have seen nowadays that, like currently there are certain things that it places systems that we have on one side an overproduction of food and the other side doesn't have any food, right? Like it's actually a crazy one with the core of this, the problems we probably cannot encounter it here in this conversation. But I also wonder, you in your work, because like you can build up systems from the ground up that are almost perfect to the point that we also know in the Western world. Like for instance, now we have seen that conventional farming is not the way forward eventually because it damaged the soil. Yeah, it doesn't give us any nutrition again in crops and all kind of other problems. Also with floatings now lately in Europe, it's seen that our grounds in a lot of places is just not very healthy. And I have wondered, like now you can build up an infrastructure that is almost as perfect. It will probably need to be perfect because in the end, over years, we learn way more about it. But do you implement like systems of regenerative farming in it? And also, we also know like the health problems is also establishing those products that, do not have too much excessive amount of sugar. And if you look at taste and all these things, do you take that into account as well when you establish these infrastructures?
Yeah, so we're working constantly to ensure the crops we're sourcing are crops that are, good for the land, good for the environment, good crops that are grown in kind of regenerative farming or other kind of more diverse farming systems, not just kind of monocrop fields of the same thing. And then, yeah, on the taste front, we're constantly working to leverage local ingredients, local spices, to give people exciting flavored food that don't just have a bunch of salt and sugar in them. People want big, bold flavors, but you can achieve those big, bold flavors in a whole bunch of different ways. Sugar and salt is just a lazy way to achieve big, bold flavors. There's all sorts of other really exciting ways to do it. And I do have I have time for one more question, but then unfortunately I have to go for this evening.
Sure. Then the last question is going to be, how do you look the future? How do you think the tailored food is gonna look in 5 years, for example?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I would be super happy if tailored food didn't exist in 5 years. We tried to share our learnings and our lessons as far and wide as possible. We are a small little organization, doing everything we can, but our goal is to influence the actions and activities and funding decisions of the world's biggest organizations, whether that's the biggest corporations out there like Unilever, who we work with, or the biggest UN agencies, or the biggest funding organizations like the Gates Foundation or others. So if we achieve our goal, all the stakeholders in the food system would be thinking really thoughtfully and designing nutritious, low-cost food products. And then whether we exist or not is kind of less important. Like, we don't need to be, at the center of this. Yeah, that would be my thought on where we are in 5 years.
Yeah, the goal is to disappear, but for the good reason, obviously.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
The reason that
And then we can do other things, like there's lots of other important problems to solve. Food, in my opinion, is a pretty simple one. So I think it's achievable, and then I would love to work on other types of problems.
I think that is really great. I believe that a lot of companies say they have a mission, but when you have a mission, you need to achieve something. So a lot of companies, they just go with this impossible mission that they know they will never achieve. Mm-hmm. But I believe that it's good that you see as your mission as something you can accomplish, and something that it can be done. So, well, thanks a lot, Taylor, for the time that you dedicated. I think your job is marvelous. It's, as I said, I think it's really noble what you're doing, the mission that you are chasing. And I think that it's really inspiring for everybody that is trying to really make an impact in the food industry, the perspective that you offer. Thanks a lot for your time. We are really, really thankful. Shako is telling me that please don't leave when we say goodbye and we close the call, please don't leave the call immediately, because needs to upload the video. And well, said that thing.
Thank you. And if anyone listening wants to connect with this